It's the world's chance to renew confidence and credibility in multilateralism, and at the same time provide tangible evidence of the value of international collaboration at a time that the world needs it most. Collaboration can trigger progress in a variety of other arenas, including fulfillment of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. I am convinced that we stand at a unique point in history. We have all the pieces of the climate jigsaw puzzle laid out in front of us, and we have the roadmap to putting those pieces together in a coherent and cohesive climate approach for the world to follow. It is now a matter of commitment and determination, and in that regard, I take great heart in the tireless work of Future Earth, the Earth League, and the World Climate Research Program, which, along with their research partners, have produced this 4th Insights edition. Each time we meet, I talk about how science underpins everything we do at UN Climate Change. It's the basis for efforts to address climate change throughout the world. But perhaps never have we been shown such tangible proof about the importance and impact of science than in 2020 and 2021. And while we are not here to talk about the coronavirus, we are here to talk about the contributions of science. The coronavirus simply underlines the primacy of science and the applicability of it throughout all aspects of our society. And it is fundamental to the climate change struggle. What particularly impressed me about your reports is that they go beyond the latest scientific understanding of the drivers and impacts of climate change, which are of course central in our process. But the fact that your reports include the social, public, health, and economic ramifications of unchecked carbon emissions makes them, in my view, doubly valuable. I can assure you that the report's observations will be of tremendous value for our COP26 deliberations in November. And already now, the point you are making, for example, about COVID recovery packages not being aligned and not being supportive of the 1.5 goal is extremely important. That's a big challenge that we as international community have this year. I want to thank you once again for your valuable efforts and for our continuing and positive relationship. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Espinosa. Thank you for being here. We're also very grateful that you and your team took initiative of starting this. So we're just following up and trying to present this each year to you. So I'd like to hand over then to Professor Dr. Johan Rockström to continue the presentations of the key insights.
Thanks, Eric, and wonderful to see you all. And thanks, Patricia. Let me just re-emphasize that it's really thanks to you that the 10 new insights in climate science have become an institution, because you have expressed and committed so early to the need and the gap we're filling. This is a complement to the IPCC. It's a complement to all the global assessment. It's a light-footed, and just as you express it, a way of really scanning off the avalanche of insights from science, from social science and natural sciences over the last 12 months, and feeding it into a way that can communicate to all your climate negotiators in the COP process for our future. The fourth insight really couples directly to Dettler's third insight on the indications of losing carbon sinks in tropical forest systems, because we have known all the time when it comes to climate impact research that water, fresh water, is victim number one. Either too much water, too little water, or water in the wrong time. Now we see in this year's insight really important progress on much better evidence on the attribution of human-caused water scarcity, We know that we have a water crisis around the corner if we continue unabated global warming. We know that the feedback dynamics are fundamental, that climate change combined with ecosystem change can lead to changes in precipitation levels affecting the stability of carbon sinks, such as the rainforests around the world. We also know that drought conditions can today interact in what we can call perfect storms. In the Horn of Africa, the droughts related to or amplified, just as you pointed out, Patricia, as an amplifier during the droughts in 2019 and 2020, combined with the desert locust invasions and COVID-19 with food riots in the midst of a pandemic, is a form of water-related, food-related perfect storm we do not want to see. So this is why we need a much larger attention on water scarcity in future climate modeling and prediction of impacts. But the fundamental insight this year is really that climate extremes impacting water scarcity is already causing migration of millions of people around the world. We see more and more evidence on climate-related water migration. Next insight. This is a first off in our insights assessments that climate change can profoundly affect our mental health. If you take the next slide here, this is an under-researched area. It is a rapidly emerging area. I think the best way to kind of set the stage on this is actually what happened this morning with the world's largest opinion poll facilitated by Achim Stein and colleagues at UNDP, showing that 60 to 70% of citizens around the world are so deeply concerned about human-caused climate change that they are backing up the scientific conclusion of a climate emergency. If you take the next slide, please. This translates to climate change having larger acute and chronic mental health impacts that cover ranges all the way from light to severe conditions. This is something we're seeing with a rising concern of anxiety, distress, but also trauma, shock, paralysis, and also suicidal risks among, for example, which we have not been able to scientifically make the attributions to, but we see, for example, the challenges for many small-scale farmers around the world and rising suicide levels around, particularly in distressed and marginal communities around the world. So this is an area that we think has to be understood and, of course, has very strong connections to COVID-19. Because with rising stress levels of mental health, we're also weaker in terms of our human resilience to deal with the stress of the pandemic. And the last insight here, or the conclusion here, is directly combined, connected to COVID, because we know that the lockdown and trapping in urban concrete environments has raised the pandemic stress on human health. And we see the same line in terms of evidence on climate change, that blue and green spaces in urban planning can help in reducing these mental health. Finally, the number 6 insight, if you take the next slide, which is the one that you referred to, Patricia, on the lack of alignment with the green recoveries on COVID-19. And if you take the next slide here, just to give 2 reflections on this. I mean, the number 1 is we have seen 2020, which scientifically from the IPCC assessments is clearly the year when we had to bend the global curve of emissions. Paradoxically, that is actually happening due to the pandemic. Now, is this something that we can celebrate? The answer is no. This is a 6-7% global reduction in emissions for the wrong cause. We cannot shut down the global economy to solve the global climate crisis. But it shows that we are in a transformative exponential journey that, as Wendy pointed out, cutting emissions by half every decade is a pace which is equivalent every year of the COVID climate pace, 6-7% per year. The second conclusion of this insight, which you're also related to, Patricia, is the fact that the green recovery investments of up to $12 trillion is not so far aligning with a true green recovery that can support the 1.5 guardrail of the Paris Agreement. So this is a big challenge we're still facing. On the other hand, a little bit of a sideline from the content in our report, I would like to just conclude by saying that given the fact that we've been able to mobilize trillions in the green recovery from COVID, never more should we be allowed to have a fight on filling the global climate fund with billions. Because how can we not have billions available for climate abatement when we have trillions available for the recovery from the pandemic? So I think this is an alignment and an integration also of the willingness to invest in the transition towards a safe future. And with that, back to you, Wendy.
Yeah, I can just mention here that for those who are listening in to the webinar, you can ask questions in the Q&A in the bottom, and then our panelists from the Insights can answer those. So after that, I'd like to hand over to Eleanor, who can present the last 4 insights.
Thank you very much, Eric. So moving on to Insight 7. COVID-19 and climate change demonstrate the need for a new social contract. I think the starting point for this insight is that the world needs innovative, imaginative, and transformative approaches to build sustainable and resilient societies. We've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic that it's exposed the inadequacy of